My name is Greg Keeley, as I check my script. And I'm the Provost and Vice President of Research of the University of New Brunswick. I actually do know that. It's a very great pleasure to welcome you to the fourth talk in the University of New Brunswick Ideas That Matter Speaker Series. This series features researchers from UNB's Faculty of Arts, some of Canada's leading scholars, on topics of importance to New Brunswickers. And I think you'll all agree that the one that we're going to hear tonight is a topic of great importance to New Brunswick. Ideas That Matter is an integral part of UNB's commitment to create an open forum for the exchange and debate of knowledge, something that we've been doing for the past 225 years. I'm very pleased that we're partnering with the private sector to bring this series to you. The 25 organizations listed on your program have generously come on board as series patrons. Tonight, I'd like to especially thank our presenting sponsor, UNB's Associated Alumni, and our patrons for tonight's talk. Seatherm Technologies, the Fredericton International Airport Authority, who we're doing a lot of business for in a couple of weeks when Congress is here, King Construction, Knightsbridge Robertson Surrett, and finally Mays Reynolds Financial Group, and I think I saw Tony here earlier. Hi, Tony. Thank you for your support and your interest in being part of this dialogue. The Ideas That Matter series is being held in conjunction with UNB's 225th anniversary celebrations and with Congress 2011, one of the largest academic gatherings in Canada, I think indeed the largest, which UNB is co-hosting with St. Thomas University this spring. Together, Congress and the Ideas That Matter series will shine the spotlight on the social sciences and humanities, highlighting the impact on New Brunswick and the world. And I think it's fair to say, parenthetically, that the social sciences and humanities are kind of the lost child of the Canadian Federal Research Council scene. SSHRC, which represents some 60% of Canadian researchers and graduate students, gets about 12% of the federal science budget. NSERC and CIHR having the rest of it, but obviously representing relatively smaller numbers. So this series is intended to, at least on UNB's part, to try and correct some of that focus. Following the presentation by tonight's speaker, we will have a question and answer session, so you'll have the opportunity to join in the discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Michael Hahn. Dr. Hahn holds the Canada Research Chair in Population and Social Policy and is a professor cross-appointed to economics and sociology. Prior to joining UNB, he spent 3 years in the Business and Labour Market Analysis Division of Stats Canada and 5 years in the Department of Sociology and the Population Research Laboratory at the University of Alberta. He continues to work with Statistics Government of Alberta on population and labour mobility issues. Michael's research appears in journals such as Urban Studies, International Migration Review, Population Research and Policy Review, and Canadian Studies in Population, all of them very fine and important journals in the field. He's also the author of an Introduction to Statistics for Canadian Social Scientists, published by Oxford University Press, and already a second edition is scheduled to appear in the spring of 2012. Michael's past research looked at immigration, housing, and socioeconomic stratification. His more recent work focuses on understanding why people make the location choices that they do and what impact these choices have on both their well-being and that of the communities that they join. It is some of the preliminary findings of this research that he will share with us all tonight. And his talk is entitled, as you can see on the screen, Can New Brunswick's Population Time Bomb Be Defused? He also promises to finish before the Canadians and Bruins start. Michael.
Thank you very much, everyone. How's my volume in the back? Are we okay? Great, thank you very much. I'll move this mic out of the way. Unlike Greg, I'm a Dutch Protestant. We're known for our dancing, so I have to wear a lapel mic so that I can move around the stage a little bit. I should thank, first of all, the UNB president for agreeing to provide hockey scores if I happen to go a little bit past 8 o'clock. So you should give Eddie a thumbs up. In addition to that, there have been a lot of people operating behind the scenes to try to make this whole Ideas That Matter speaker series a reality. First and foremost, it's the UNB staff in many ways, because without their ideas, I think our ideas really wouldn't matter or they wouldn't be heard. So thank you to all of you. That's very important. Absolutely. Additionally, and no less importantly, our sponsors and patrons have been incredibly generous. Again, without them, we would not have been able to make this a possibility, and it's really good. And it's one of the things that I really noticed upon moving here to Fredericton from Edmonton is that there's a real sense of community engagement in issues of public importance, like demography, for example. So when you have construction companies, airport authorities, and various other funders kind of jumping on board to provide their support for a topic like this, I think that's really unique, and we could probably say it's sort of a made in New Brunswick phenomenon. I think it's really, it's worthy of applause. I think it's really, really important. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to thank and curse the other presenters in the Ideas That Matter series for setting the bar so impossibly high. Before I get going, my outline, just to briefly give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about today, I have 4 main points. The first thing I'm going to talk about is why the title that I chose. Why are we interested in a population bomb? Why are we talking about population bombs? Second, I'll break down the problem, if there is one, in New Brunswick and start to talk about the prospect of a population issue that occurs in the province, whether it's really plausible and worthwhile to talk about. Third, talk about possible solutions, and since nobody likes a bad news story, I'll try to end off on some good news and optimism. And I should warn you now, I'm having a little bit of AV trouble. I think partially, probably fully, it's my fault. I was trying to make a few fancy transitions and slides, so the swirling W was a failed attempt to try to have that roll onto the screen. Why a population bomb? Well, first and foremost, I have to keep up with my colleagues. I'll read to you the original title of the talk that I was proposing. New Brunswick's Population Profile from Confederation to the Present, an investigation of the fertility, mortality, and migration patterns of successive cohorts of native-born and immigrant populations and the prospects for altering the province's demographic fortunes. So, after looking over all of the other titles, I had to scale it down. I had to put something a little more zippier, a little bit zippier in the title, so I chose to talk about bombs. Second, I had to convince people to come tonight. Third, I'm going to try to contrast some of the population issues that are extant today with those of the past. Okay, I used to teach demography at the University of Alberta. And it was there that I really started to develop my appreciation for how understudied and uninterested the overall student population is in demography as a topic. So I was giving a class to 150 students on demographic training. I was teaching them about the life table. And maybe if there are any demographers in the crowd, you might know what that is. And I couldn't help but notice during one particular lecture that there was an overall lack of engagement within the student population. So after lecturing for about 10 or 15 minutes, I said to them, guys, what do I need to do to make this interesting to you? Would it help if I juggled monkeys in front while I gave the lecture? And one particularly bold and perhaps a little morbid student raised his hand. He said, I would listen to you talk about demography if you agreed to light the monkeys on fire. So I think this is a real shame. I took the point. I don't think he was serious, but I took the point, and it really does sort of bring home how understudied demography is and how unengaged student populations are in the topic. David Foote, many of you are probably familiar with David Foote, sort of issued the flat-footed statement at one point that demography explains 2/3 of everything. Now, we may or may not agree with that statement, but if that's true, what that would suggest is that 1/3 of all students in all courses in all universities across Canada are studying that other third. Now, clearly Professor Foote has motivations for his message, but still, it does bring home sort of the importance of the topic. And I hope to extend that a little bit today by showing how one piece of one cohort's decision to leave New Brunswick has had longer-term implications for the province's overall economic and social well-being in the present. Finally, and then I'll get on with it. The term population bomb, comes from a 1968 book by a botanist named Paul Ehrlich. I'll get to that last. Prior to Ehrlich, there were several people talking about overpopulation as an issue. The first one that I could find was from 1600 BCE, where the Babylonian gods, in their creation story, threw humans on Earth to do some of the work that they didn't want to do, cleaning latrines and the like. One problem occurred, however, was that humans started to helplessly reproduce. And at some point, the Babylonian gods decided that the humans had become overpopulated. So what did they do? Well, they sent drought to Earth to take care of the overpopulation problem. This is in 1600 BCE. Not far after that, Zeus's choice to take care of overpopulation issues was to incite war, thereby once again reducing population size. Fast forwarding 2,500 years, Carl Sachs, so I can just do that, Carl Sachs wrote a book in 1955 called Standing Room Only, where he predicted that humans were reproducing so rapidly that within his lifetime, he predicted that there would only be enough room on Earth for everyone to stand. 1955, not that long ago. So what he was predicting then was that widespread poverty, drought, pestilence, famine, all of these things that Malthus talked about earlier would come once overpopulation really took hold. Finally, the namesake of this talk, the population bomb in 1968 by Paul Ehrlich, predicted once again mass starvation, but he was a little more bold and thought it would happen 2 to 3 years after his book was published. And he predicted that the world's population would once again explode like a bomb. So, you have to bear with me, I'm trying to be a little bit high-tech tonight. Around the time of Ehrlich's book, New Brunswick's population was very well set, very well established for the type of explosion that Ehrlich was talking about. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on here, this is a distribution of the overall population of New Brunswick. And since it's a flash app, it's possible to extend this over time. So right now we're looking at the population pyramid of the province of New Brunswick from 1960. In the top left corner, you can see the year. In the top right corner, there's a population count. So the population in New Brunswick was 589,000 in 1960. As you can see, we have lots of people that are young, not as many old people. So as I move this through time, watch a few things. First of all, watch what happens at the bottom. What happens to young people? Watch these guys, because this is the baby boom. Watch what happens to them. And also, watch what happens at the top. So I guess watch everything. And we'll see what happens here. So I'll move it through slowly. You can see the years start to advance. There's the end of the baby boom. You can see the baby boom starting to age. They're moving up. The average age is approximately 20 now. Notice the baby boom is shrinking. Look at how small it's becoming. It's roughly half of its size. By 2006, the baby boom of New Brunswick is nearly half the size that it was in 1960. Furthermore, the baby echo marks a significant departure from the size of the baby boom. Even more so, what we call the baby echo, the children of the baby boom, is also significantly smaller than the cohorts before it. So, if we're able to talk about, and I'll wind up quickly, if we're able to talk about population bombs when population pyramids look like this, it makes sense to me that it's equally plausible to talk about bombs when it looks like this. Okay, so That's a very long-winded justification for the title of my lecture. Before we move on, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the concepts that I'll be throwing out throughout the lecture, just to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page. And I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but each of these things has a very significant, precise meaning within demography, so I thought I'd just throw out the definitions now so that all is well. First of all, there are three basic components of population growth or decline: births, international in-migration, or interprovincial in-migration. International in-migration and interprovincial in-migration are significantly different, that although it's essentially the same thing, people from outside are coming into the province, we keep them separate because the policy levers that can be pulled to adjust either of these outcomes is quite different. So usually demographers will keep them separate. Second, there are three relevant birth cohorts to talk about. There are more, but I'll talk about three. There's the baby boom, and that captures everyone that was born between 1946, so just after the war, to 1964. Second, we have the baby bust, 1965 to 1979. Third, we have the baby echo. Two assumptions. First, both are fairly easy to grasp. Every year, we all get 1 year older. So the next time, yeah, every one of us. So the next time somebody comes up to you and they haven't seen you for a while, and they tell you that you've aged, you now have a comeback. Second, we're more alike than we are different. We tend to have children at the same time. We tend to buy homes at the same time. We tend to move at the same time. And we tend to die at the same time. So with all of these things in mind, we can look at, with some qualifications, we can look at what previous birth cohorts have done and get a pretty good idea, at least issue a fairly decent prediction about what a future cohort will do. So what I've done here is taken the population pyramid from 2006 in blue and 2001 outlined in red to illustrate the first principle, that each year we all age. So if you imagine the 2001, the red lines, and you push it up 5 years, it more or less coincides with the blue spot, the 2006 distribution. That's one thing. The second thing that I want to point out is that the baby bust and the baby echo are significantly smaller. So when Statistics Canada projects that population is going to grow in the province of New Brunswick well into 2036, they're able to do so, and we can almost talk about things being okay because the province is growing, because all of the baby boomers will still, or not all, many of the baby boomers will still be with us. It's not uncommon for somebody that's 55 to be expected to live for another 30 years. So what's going to happen when we have all of these people in their 80s and 90s, and we have this part of the population being left to take care of them? That is an interesting question. I think that's one of the burning policy issues in New Brunswick today. So when we see population projections that say we're going to be between 770,000 and 870,000 in 30 years, or 25-ish years, that does not mean that all is well. In my mind, it means, in some ways, that population decline is probably inevitable. It's hard to imagine a scenario where all of these holes, all of these gaps, could be filled either by interprovincial in-migration or international in-migration. We would have to dramatically increase the number of people crossing our borders to compensate for the size of the baby boom. So to get an idea of where New Brunswick sits relative to other provinces in Canada, oh, I think there's supposed to be a red arrow. Whoops. Yes, that's one of my other technical advances. I figured out, for this lecture, I figured out how to insert a red arrow. So if anyone would like to know how to do that, I can give you a crash course after the lecture. So over time, what's happened is that provinces have essentially bifurcated into have and have not demographic provinces. By and large, there's a bit of a gap in 1861. Quebec and Ontario already have larger populations, but other than that, every other province is more or less the same size. It's more or less business as usual until the 1940s to the 1960s, 70s. Then we see a division. Several provinces start to pull ahead. Several provinces, New Brunswick being one of them, more or less stay where they are. So what I want to talk about today, or what I'd like to talk about today, if you'll let me, is why this has happened. So why is it that some provinces have taken a lead, some provinces have not? One of the really interesting things about being able to do research in this day and age is that we have demographers, economists, sociologists, an incredible amount of data to work with. So I was able to get population counts from 1851 all the way to the present, year-specific, and I was able to get year-specific urbanization rates for every province in Canada over time. So what this allows me to do is sort of project in time what has been happening in various things. So along the x-axis, we have population of provinces. Along the y-axis, we have the percent urban. I've attached a marker to the province of New Brunswick so that you can keep an eye on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this forward in time. So once again, fairly tightly clustered in 1852. Down here, we have the year. You'll notice it advanced once I hit play. So look what's happening. The provinces that experience an increase in urbanization are the ones that really see significant growth. So what this starts to suggest is that it is the provinces that have urbanized, that experience the greatest growth. What this also suggests is that the correlation is not perfect. There are various other things that matter. But by and large, the evidence here starts to suggest that urbanization is a large part of the story behind why some provinces make it, some provinces don't demographically. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's almost inevitable that a province that grows is going to see an increase in urbanization because there will simply be more people in a finite space, which suggests that urbanization is almost a necessary byproduct of this. So the nice thing about asking yourself questions is that you usually have the answer. And I'm able to look at the density, again, because the data we have are so good, the density of individuals by province, and we can play this over time to see if that hypothesis is actually correct. So once again, watch what happens. Provinces sort of spray out all over the place, almost in a shotgun-like pattern, suggesting that the relationship between population density at the provincial level and the overall population of the province are not necessarily that tightly linked. In the top right corner, we have Ontario, but Ontario is so out in the corner, it's so weird. I mean, I can say that I'm from Ontario. So Ontario is so weird, and all of the other provinces here denote a bit of a trend, but if you take a look at some of the ones that have the highest density, you see things like Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. So it's not just the population density that matters, it's urbanization that seems to play a part. Okay. So, 2 points so far. First of all, the province of New Brunswick shed a lot of its baby boomers. Second of all, part of the reason provinces grow is urbanization. Combine those two things, and you start to think about the decision set that baby boomers had when they were looking for places to live back in the day. For reasons that I won't necessarily be able to talk about today, people have long wanted to go to cities. Demographers refer to cities as population sinks. So you can imagine water on the sink of a counter, and all of the if there's water on the counter, all of the water will eventually fall into the sink. Well, cities serve as that sink in many ways. People will come from all over to fall into that sink, and the unlikely to ever leave. So baby boomers, as they started to age and they were thinking about places to live, had essentially these 20 cities, especially if they wanted a big city, they had these 20 cities to consider. I'll let you take a quick look. You'll notice that there are no New Brunswick cities on there. One of the implications of that is that, and this is an important one, I think, baby boomers did not leave New Brunswick for other provinces. They did not just leave New Brunswick for other provinces. They left New Brunswick for other cities. They went to cities. 90% of the 50,000 baby boomers that left New Brunswick are in one of these cities today. How did they do? Well, I looked at 2001 data, and I have to apologize that I can only look at 2001. That's the most recent year where province of birth was asked with any great detail. People that left in the 1960s, early 70s, by 2001 were doing significantly better than their New Brunswick provincial counterparts. They were 2 times more likely to own a business, suggesting there's an entrepreneurial spirit there. They were 3 times more likely to have a university degree than the New Brunswick counterparts. They were 4 times more likely to be high earners, which I define as earning over $100,000. So one of the implications of this, and you can argue with me about this later, was that some of the cream of the crop of the baby boomer cohort picked up and went to other cities within Canada. My parents immigrated from the Netherlands in the 1950s, and one of the jokes or bickerings that kind of go back and forth was whether or not it was the best Dutch people that floated across the Atlantic and came to North America, or if it was the worst. And the side of the debate you're on depends on where you live. So there might be some of that here as well. Was it the best or was it the worst that left New Brunswick? I'm not going to wade into that debate. Suffice it to say, these people were doing fairly well. Now, they're doing fairly well now. And if you ask them, and this was a very painful decision for many of them, because I've had the fortune of seeing many of them and talking to many of them in places like Edmonton, Fort McMurray, etc. So why did you leave? Why did you leave New Brunswick? It's a beautiful province. And they would often say, well, it was a very hard decision. I left because of opportunity. Well, I find the term, to be honest, opportunity to be frustratingly vague, because we don't really know exactly what that means. Opportunity as in what? Does it mean that you actually have a job that's handed to you in another province? Does it mean that you have a framework developed for you that allows you to create your own opportunities? I don't know. So I did some more digging in the data, and I was only able to go back to 1981. But what I found was New Brunswick, and I'm calling them the people that left the province, the baby boomers that left the province, I'm going to call New Brunswick exiles. New Brunswick exiles in 1981 were not doing better. They were doing better, a little bit better, than those that stayed, but they were doing quite a bit worse than people of the same age group in the city that they chose to settle in. More likely to be unemployed, less likely to be high earners, less likely to be self-employed. By 2001, all of these outcomes had reversed. More likely to be self-employed, more likely to be high earners, more likely to be unemployed. One of the implications of that I'm making, or one of the interpretations that I'm making of this, is that first of all, there may have been opportunity, I'm not denying that, in other provinces. But some of these New Brunswickers had an entrepreneurial spirit. They had their own drive, they had their own initiative, they made their opportunities. They were unable to do that in New Brunswick because the big cities that they were seeking just were not here. Now, why am I talking about this? Why is this so important? Well, I'll go back to the population pyramid that I showed you earlier, but before doing that, I'd like to just quickly show you this slide. This is a plot of when populations within Canada choose to move. So here you have age ranges, and here you have the percentage of people that move within that age range. What clearly jumps out to me and you don't have to pay too much attention to the different lines, just notice that the lines are more or less the same pattern, is that the overwhelming majority of people leave in their late teens to their early 30s. That's when the baby boomers left. That's when the baby echo left. That's likely when, that's when the baby boom left. That's when the baby bust left. That's likely to be when the baby echo leaves. So why is that important? Well, going back to our population pyramid, the baby echo, the children of baby boomers, are now just approaching the age where they're going to be looking for a place to live. So in terms of population bombs, diffusing population bombs, targeting populations that are sort of footloose, looking for places to live, this is a critical population. I'll jump back one slide. Trying to bring baby boomers back to the province is likely to yield sort of mixed results because they're more or less attached to the communities that they move to. But baby echo in New Brunswick, there's still a possibility here to keep them here. Now, the other thing we looked at earlier was urbanization. So it's likely that these people want to live in urban centers just like their predecessors did. Now, there's some good news here. Wait a second. There's some good news here. First of all, some of New Brunswick's cities are growing quite rapidly. Moncton and Fredericton both grew between 5 and 6% between 2001 and 2006. It's not in the top 10, but still that's significant growth. Both are fairly large. They would have probably made it on they could have made it on the top 20 if none of the other cities grew. That's a big if. But the possibility is there. So there are urban centers. Now, I'm going to delve a little bit into policy implications. One of the other analyses that I did that I wasn't able to share, that I just didn't have time to share with you today, was that I compared New Brunswick's population to rural populations in other parts of Canada. And what I found is that the rural parts of the province, many of the rural parts of the province, are not doing significantly worse than rural parts of other parts of Canada. Now, clearly there are exceptions, such as regional municipality Wood Buffalo, but by and large, rural populations in Canada are experiencing some of the toughest economic conditions. They are likely to experience the highest rates of population migration in the future. And in this way, and this is where it starts to become a bit of a good news story, New Brunswick is sort of unique because although it only holds 1% of Canada's population, Canada's urban population, it has 6% of its rural population. So there is a significant rural population, and it's widely suspected, particularly in Moncton, that it is this rural population moving into New Brunswick cities that's driving the population of these cities up. So, in some ways, New Brunswick's rural depopulation, that we often hear a lot about, it's not unique across Canada. Second, the baby echo is at the age where they're looking for a place to live. And finally, investments in recruitment and retention are likely to have sort of different levels of success for each birth cohort. So there are policies that could be developed that focuses particular groups because we know that this is the group that's most likely to be looking for a place to live. It's the groups that are most likely to leave or to want to leave. Finally, I have one more slide. This isn't just an add-on. One of the other implications of New Brunswick's population decline, almost inevitable population decline over the longer term, is that I think provincial economies, the provincial governments, plural, is going to have to think about ways to start living with decline. Other countries have already begun to do this. Here's a short list. We could add more to that. And that's one of the things that we'll have to think about. This is in some ways still a frontier economy, but the other way it's almost a post-frontier economy. And some of the implications of that need to be followed through. So does it make sense to invest in schools of education? Well, arguably, to take an example for one of my colleagues, arguably the money could be used better elsewhere because there aren't that many people coming through the education system over the longer term. I think I have one more slide. Oh, this is the last one. Okay. Finally, I thought I'd conclude with a couple of New Brunswick rural-urban fast facts. The first one I've shared with you before. New Brunswick is near the top of the heap when it comes to this. Only PEI has a higher proportion of rural dwellers, and only PEI has a higher population density than the rest of than New Brunswick. Second, New Brunswick currently has the same proportion of urban dwellers as Canada as a country did in 1920. So there are various political, economic, social explanations for why this is the case, but New Brunswick is where Canada was in some ways in 1920, and I don't mean that in a negative way. There are reasons why people live in rural centers. Finally, for the first time in history, in 2008, Statistics Canada reported that New Brunswick had more older people than younger people. So I'm talking about the baby boom population jumping to the baby echo population because I think there are clear implications for the way baby boomers behaved that can be extended to understanding what the baby echo is likely to do. So if we remember the second slide I showed where this population pyramid sort of shrinks over time, one of the lessons from that is that a significant proportion of New Brunswickers left. And this is something that I believe we can't afford to do with the baby echo. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.